So Hasbro have just become embroiled in a massive scandal when they decided to remove hugely iconic monsters from the new edition of D&D, and people are now extremely mad about it. War has come to our TTRPG war game, which you have to admit is a little ironic. However, this scandal is just the beginning. There's a ton more going on here, a ton of extremely bad stuff. Oh dear. So if you've missed it, this month the hotly anticipated final book of the triumvirate of new books making up the new, not new edition of D&D is finally coming out. This is the Monster Manual, famous for being a manual about monsters. It includes the stats and special abilities and details and some lore of all the enemy creatures that are essential to the running of a D&D campaign. This is a book that occupies a special place in the heart of every single twisted DM. To run a game of D&D, you basically need this thing. Unless of course you're like me and invent every monster wholesale for your game. What can I say? The Monster Manual just lacks a lot of piss golems. I need piss golems in my game. Dare you enter my magical realm? Now, with the recent news that the new, not new edition of D&D is doing pretty badly in terms of sales, and actually so badly it might just take Hasbro down with it, you know, unless they can get saved by the new Sesame Street Magic the Gathering set. But it has been my hope that the launch of the new Monster Manual will at least perform well and help save the new edition of D&D from being strangled before it even really gets going. To be frank, this book needs to perform well financially, or I have to get a new gig. So, you know, get some sales. Unfortunately, however, this new book has arrived with all the grace and decorum of the auto-moderator in the Iowa Swingers subreddit welcoming you to the party. Because when content creators first received press copies of the new Monster Manual from Hasbro Wizards, you know, to start creating previews and marketing and hype videos about it, that gambit backfired spectacularly as a huge scandal emerged when people began to notice that Hasbro have decided to totally gut the book of classic monsters like Orcs, Dwarger, and Drow. And this decision has led to a ton of outraged press, outraged videos, threads, angry comments, and I'm pretty sure Chris Cox keeps seeing the same dark van menacingly idling outside his house every night. You know they can see you twitching the curtains, Chris. Look out. To say that the changes in here have been controversial is kind of like saying that Epstein might have been up to something on that island. So why did Hasbro remove these enemies from the Monster Manual? Why did they court so much potential anger in such a pivotal book? Well, potentially because they wanted to avoid racism. Oh boy. Yeah, we're talking about it. This video is definitely getting demonetized now. So, you know, why not support me on Patreon so that I can eat this week? Or if you don't want me to eat, you can subscribe to the channel. And make sure to do all that before I reveal whether I am or am not racist. Okay, subscribed? Checked out Patreon? Perfect, cool. I am racist, but only against people from Enniskillen. You don't know them, but they really deserve your ire. I actually tried looking up some Enniskillen slurs for the video, but it's all just anti-Irish stuff, so I'm not going to be doing that today. It's only bad when it affects me. So, okay, the removal of Orcs, Drow, and Dwarger, this has been extremely controversial because, well, I mean, these are iconic monsters to D&D. They're pretty classic. Now, the worry about racism from Hasbro comes into play because Drows, Dwarger, and especially Orcs have all been criticized in the past as potentially being racist depictions of, or historically inspired by racist depictions of, real-life groups in some way. And let's be honest, if this was a description of somebody you knew, it wouldn't be particularly flattering. Ooh, what could this monster be? Wait, the Irish? Aww, well that sucks. Racism's bad now. Now look, I think this conversation crops up a lot because Orcs have always been intended as a pretty easy bad guy in D&D from the very beginning. They've always kind of represented the savage other. As the author N.K. Jemisin says, quote, "Orcs are human beings who can be slaughtered without conscience or apology." But that means that if Orcs are a metaphor or analogous to a certain group of specific people, then yeah, karma-free killing of them ain't too hot. But many people disagree that orcs are such a representation. And to be fair, I have had plenty of players in my D&D games that are totally fine with butchering orcs, but also humans, and dwarves, and babies. I've had some pretty gnarly games of D&D. It's really not a great morality simulator. There is a reason that the phrase murder hobo was coined to describe Dungeons and Dragons games. I just would not be looking to them for values. It's pretty much kill thing, get money. Wait, that's where Hasbro learned their evil. Of course, it all makes sense now. But this conversation about orcs and Dungeons and Dragons, it mirrors the same discussion that often pops up in general fantasy, a conversation that I suspect Hasbro are very aware of, because every few years there are articles and conversations about the depiction of orcs in pop culture, academia, and in the bed sheets, which is a perfectly normal kink, by the way. Actually, Droy would make for a good dommy mommy now that I think about it. Wait, that was just Baldur's Gate 3. That's how that got so successful. Gonna need to do a replay of that. But this is a proper topic that gets discussed a lot by people much smarter than me. There are even actual studies about this sort of thing. Though, personally, this is something that I am pretty insulated from. Because frankly, for one, I live in Ireland, and I'm pretty sure that the Irish might actually be part of the inspiration for orcs. And secondly, I view orcs very differently from how I suspect the classic Tolkien view of orcs is. I got my first real taste of fantasy and role-playing in the virtual realms of World of Warcraft. I cut my role-playing teeth on all the erotic role-play I could handle in the back alleys of Goldshire, making a couple of silver a pop by dancing on mailboxes for the pleasure of strangers. And Warcraft as a setting has always depicted orcs less as savage monsters to be killed, like in D&D, and more like honorable warriors who frankly were the good guys in that game, at least by Warcraft 3. But that all said, for many in D&D, orcs are one of the first enemies they'll ever encounter in the game. They are part of the formative experience for many within the TTRPG hobby. So it's no surprise that a lot of people were at the very least shocked to discover that orcs are no longer an available enemy archetype or stat block available to run in a game of D&D straight out of the Monster Manual. And honestly, all the outraged headlines probably should have been expected by Hasbro, and yet I don't think they were, and that is a bit concerning. It shows a real lack of awareness. Now, this book was our last chance to get the new edition of D&D some success. Hasbro really don't need another scandal. They got plenty of them already going on. But unfortunately, this doesn't end here. It all gets a lot worse, because this massive argument about orcs is just the beginning of multiple, far worse, much bigger scandals with this new book. Problems that will define Dungeons and Dragons for the next 10 years. And I am genuinely really worried. But hey, it could be worse. You could be getting a text from great-grand Mildred begging you to send her money to pay for a botched elf ear surgery. There's just one problem though. She's already dead. No, it's not a ghost on your phone. It's simply a fraudster who got access to all your private details and knows that Grand Mildred always wanted to be an elf, and now they're simply using the face of your loved ones to get access to all your money. For you. Wait, that's much worse than a ghost. Luckily, today's video is sponsored by Hogo. Hogo is a privacy and money management app focused on keeping your data private and your money safe, and it even rewards you for doing so. Because the internet is growing increasingly effective at sneaking away with your private data without your knowledge, from your purchase history to your address to even details about your family. So that's why Hogo has gamified the act of protecting yourself, allowing you to literally swipe to get your personal data off suspicious broker sites that sell your information. And even better, every single time you do, Hogo rewards you, letting you cash in their coins for plushies or even gift cards to places like Amazon, Taco Bell, and more. And hey, who can turn down free stuff? It's like I always say, I'll take anything if they're giving it away. So if you want to be rewarded for improving your credit, managing your finances, and protecting your privacy, check out the link in the description below, or simply scan the QR code on the screen right now to get a free trial. And make sure that old Grand Mildred never gets in touch with you from beyond the Grey Havens ever again. And thanks to Hogo for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so there are a very wide variety of opinions on the topic of orcs, and as a corporation dedicated to maximizing profit, they have made that very clear, it is no surprise to me that Hasbro have decided to simply try and avoid any future controversy at all costs by taking the first opportunity they've had in a decade to remove certain monsters that they think might be a problem. And now it has blown up in their face to some extent. But for Hasbro, the orc problem, okay, now I am sounding a little racist, is a bit more complicated, because surely now with the removal of orcs from the monster manual, the next conversation will just be about goblins. And then hobgoblins. I mean, all of these creatures, they can all be viewed very similar to orcs. In fact, in Lord of the Rings, they're basically the same thing. There's a Lord of the Ring fact for you ring heads. And yet, these creatures, they weren't removed from the monster manual. So, you know, what gives? Have Hasbro just managed to piss everyone off by doing the complete wrong thing for everybody? Well, not exactly. Hasbro have actually anticipated that conversation in the future by making massive, sweeping changes to tons of monsters in the monster manual, to the extent that I think it might actually be a huge problem. You see, now, instead of goblins, hobgoblins, gnolls, bullywugs, bugbears, Yuan-ti, and the Welsh all being categorized as humanoids like they were in the 2014 monster manual, i.e. they're categorized as vaguely similar to humans and therefore subject of comparison, Hasbro Wizards have instead decided to take the very big brain move of turning them all into aliens. No, not those kinds. Those guys are still in Roswell, and I will find the truth. No, I'm talking about fantasy aliens. For example, in the new monster manual, goblins, they've now been transformed into the exotic fae. Gnolls have now been changed from very bad dogs into demonic fiends. Hasbro is transforming all the monsters in this manual into things that you can slaughter without consequence, which sort of feels like a weird way to address potential future discussions about whether some of the creatures in here could have racist connotations. I mean, let's just turn them into not even close to human. Haha! Now they can't say we're racist. It's the sort of logic that let Samurai Jack kill a whole lot of people by simply changing the color of their blood a little and calling them all robots. Admittedly though, that did lead to some damn fine television. But there is a problem with this decision because it has a massive impact on the actual game of D&D. For example, goblins being Fae now means that they are immune to dozens of the most popular spells in the game, and therefore my standard D&D adventure opening where the players have to fight a village of goblins, that might actually begin to resemble Goblin Slayer as I originally intended, so there is some upside at least. What? Getting to put your very weird, very specific fetish in a game is one of the few pleasures open to the evil DM. It's the only reason that D&D was even invented. Didn't you hear about my piss golems earlier? I mean, somebody has to inspire all those RPG horror stories. It just so happens that like 65% of them are me. You're welcome, Crick Crab. But encouraging goblin aside and changing humanoids into otherworldly creatures, there is still hope for orcs, because orcs haven't been totally removed from the game just because they've left the monster manual. They're still inside Dungeons and Dragons. It's just that they are now a player race rather than simply a monster to be killed. They have in many ways been upgraded, leveled up, and this means that you too can live out your Jesus fantasy in orc format. And you don't even need to own and operate a multi-billion-dollar video game company to do so. You're welcome, Metzen. Just play D&D. And historically, when a former monster becomes a playable race in Dungeons and Dragons, they do tend to be removed from the monster manual and instead plopped straight into the player's handbook for players to make characters with instead. This happened back in 4th edition, for example, when tieflings became playable and were moved from the monster manual to the player's handbook. And in compensation, gnomes were rightfully banned to players, and they were banished back to where they belonged, the NPC book, where they should still be.
I'm a monster. Rawr.
And for Dry, it's the same story. They are also playable for characters. And now it's happening to orcs. But there is all precedent for this. And honestly, as a community, we probably should have seen it coming the moment that orcs were announced as a playable race. So it doesn't really bother me. Actually, while editing this, I've realized I was totally wrong about this point. Looking back at the 4th edition monster manual, Wizards of the Coast actually included stat blocks for every single player race inside the monster manual. And it's even the only monster manual to include humans. And I kind of wish that they'd done it again this time. That would have been a pretty easy solution for this supposed problem. I guess there is an argument to be made though, that by not including those stats, you allow different creatures and peoples and NPCs to be different things, and it actually expands what the DM can do. But you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. If you wanted options, you'd be playing fucking GURPS. Ah, who am I kidding? Nobody's playing GURPS. But hey, you know, for those who really need orcs, then you can pick up Flea Mortals from Matt Colville. Has like 8 different kinds of orcs inside there. I mean, Colville's famous for the advice that if you don't know what to do in your game, just have an orc kick in the door and attack everybody. There's gonna be plenty of orc monsters over there. Though both the Dwarger and the Schwerfneblin, I don't know how to pronounce that, and neither do you, let's be honest. They are noticeably absent from the player's handbook and the monster manual, so I guess they're just gone for good, though no one seems to care, so. But for orcs, they're still in the game, and honestly, for those who want to use orc antagonists in the new, not new edition of D&D, they can use one of the generic NPC stat blocks in the back of the monster manual in place of an orc. Maybe use the tough or berserker stats, and then just add on the orc racial ability to spice it up a little and have it run at people really aggressively. Classic orc. That is the solution that I'll be going with when I use orcs in future games. Job sorted. However, all of that said, there is another major scandal with this monster manual. One that to me is way more important and impactful on the future of Dungeons and Dragons. A problem that has been shared by every single new D&D release of the new edition, but has gone totally unremarked upon. Hasbro are getting away with it, but it's namely that as I record this video, to read the new monster manual that we've been discussing, you not only need to buy it, or pre-order it in fact, but also you need to pay Hasbro $5 every month for the privilege. Because we're all talking about this new book, but it isn't even out yet. Not really, and yet lots of people have their hands on it. How did they get that? Well, it's because Hasbro have started a program where if you subscribe to D&D Beyond and join their digital platform, you can get early access to all the new content weeks in advance, including the new monster manual. And that should be a scandal. That is something we should be talking about right now, but it has been totally obscured by all these conversations about orcs. And I'm really worried that this normalization of video game style early access monetization with D&D is really getting its hooks in. It's becoming a normal part of the hobby, but it should not be a normal standard for the TTRPG hobby. It should be alien and weird. And yet, there's been no blowback to Hasbro, and no doubt that the next D&D book in July will therefore have the same policy applied to it, and then the one that's coming in August too, and then the one that's coming out in November and December and January and Smarch. That last month gets invented next year, but it's a really big deal. So if I were truly cynical, and everyone knows I'm not, I'd say that this outrage has really worked, actually, to Hasbro's advantage. Because while Hasbro are obviously genuinely keen not to, you know, appear racist, I don't think they really care, because they always seem to simply respond to these allegations by making a small, performative throwaway change and then just moving on. Like they renamed the term race to species, but at the end of the day, if you play D&D and pick a dwarf, you're still gonna get dark vision, you still get resistance to poison, +1 HP per level, and the ability to see through stone. The underlying DNA of D&D as a game hasn't really changed, whether you want it to or not. And orcs are still around, but now, you know, there's early access pre-orders in the game too. Not great. But let me know what you think in the comments. So if you enjoyed this thoughtful and not at all clickbaited look at the current controversy, and appreciate keeping up with the news of D&D and TTRPGs, while also getting to learn all about piss golems, I need your support, because content creators are leaving YouTube. It's getting really hard out here, and I personally am getting demonetized by YouTube a lot, and this video likely will be as well. I'm gonna say it again, people. Piss golems. So please support me on Patreon and help me keep the lights on, and also eat. You'll get bonus content, ad-free content, a free game, and even exclusive live streams with me. And thanks so much to my patrons, especially CryptoCav, and I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye.